Well, let's jump straight into this, which is Darkness, Darkness. It's the last of the Charlie Resnick books. It was published in 2014, and it's being adapted to the stage at Nottingham Playhouse. So I thought we could begin by discussing the subject, because one of the themes of this is the miners' strike of 1984 and 1985. I should say I grew up in a village in North Nottinghamshire, and I can just about remember how divisive it was and how vivid indeed it remains in a lot of people's memories. So it was a brave choice of subject matter. Perhaps you could talk a little bit about how you decided, how you chose that subject matter.
Yeah, sure. It's partly because I knew I wanted to write one more Resnick novel. I had stopped after 10 because I thought 10 was a good number. But then for various other reasons I wrote an 11, after a 10-year gap, I wrote an 11th Resnick novel. And 11 just seemed a really silly number to stop on. I thought I need an even number. And so I knew I wanted to write one more, and I knew that would be the final Resnick book. And then I have to say, well, Random House had a small eye on the marketing. The 30th anniversary of the miners' strike was coming up in 2014. So one shouldn't ignore those marketing opportunities, I'm told. But more importantly, because I knew it was going to be the last novel, I wanted the story to have a bit of kind of heft to it, a bit of substance, more than would necessarily always be the case. So I thought the miners' strike certainly has, in this area, a great deal of heft. But the other thing was, it would give me a chance to take Resnick through the journey from now back 30 years to not long after he started.
Right, because Lonely Hearts, I think, was published in '89, so that must have been in gestation in that sort of mid-'80s, which is where you go back to with...
Yes, yes, Lonely Hearts is '89, so I would have written that in '88. I think, and the other thing that made it work for me, was a police officer in Nottingham CID called Peter Coles, who some of you may know or heard of, who I've kept in touch with and who's been my he's retired now, been my advisor through from about the third Resnick book on. Now, Peter Coles was involved in the strike. Peter Coles did exactly the same job in real life that Resnick does in the books during the strike. So I knew that okay, there were two things. I thought, this is really tricky territory. Do I really want a book set in the miners' strike? And then I've got to go and talk to audiences in Nottingham and, and Yorkshire and whatever, and, and there are going to be people who were on one side and people who are on the other and people who are in the NUM and whatever. And so I thought, that's a bit dangerous, a bit iffy. But then because Peter had done that specific job and knew a lot about it, that gave me a kind of beginning. I talked to other people after that. So I went and spent a couple of days up with him. He lives up in Cumbria. Just talking about what he did during the strike and therefore what Resnick might have done, and then moved out from there. So I wanted it to give me something really substantial to build the book around and give me an opportunity to look at Resnick thinking about now, and what does he feel now about what he did during the strike, what policing in the strike was like more generally, and so on. And I think the other thing with Resnick is that he feels to the reader as though he's part of a community, as though he belongs. I think people in the these books sell more copies in Nottingham and Nottinghamshire than anywhere else, not surprisingly. So there is something, there's something that kind of resonates particularly with people in the area, but that also works for people who aren't in the area. So people in America feel this character belongs to that community that you've set him in, and that's a real kind of relationship. So, otherwise, if you only sold books in Nottinghamshire, you wouldn't very far. So there's something universal that comes from that, and it's, I think, so it's some kind of mixture of a character who is, on one sense, quite isolated but nevertheless belongs to the community and kind of has a relationship with it that is kind of largely positive.
I'm a Nottingham lad, born and bred, lived here all my life. We don't tend to have professional Nottinghamians. There's professional Yorkshire people, we've got a lot of professional Geordies, Scousers, Londoners and whatever.
Yeah.
We don't really push ourselves, and we're not in the media very much, particularly now Brian Clough's gone, who was probably the person who did it. Do you think Resnick would have been commercially more successful if you'd have put him somewhere else, or not?
That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, I deliberately didn't put him in London, for instance, which is the other place. For me, I just needed to put him somewhere that I knew.
Yeah.
I don't know whether. I mean, there are a number of things I think that. That he's not been unsuccessful.
No, I wasn't suggesting.
No. But whether he. I don't know the answer to that. Is the honest truth. I mean, whenever kind of people write little blurbs about him, or if something's going to be on the radio, or if I'm doing a talk somewhere, they always say Nottingham based.
Right.
So that's a positive.
Yeah. Well,
it's like the guy on the trains I've been catching this week, who says, we will soon be arriving in Nottingham. So it says it with that very kind of positive. So I'm not sure. I mean, but there are successful detective series set in all kinds of strange places, aren't there? I mean, like remote islands off the top of Scotland or whatever.
Yeah.
So. I think if I'd done that, he would have ended up in a more densely populated detective area. So I think one of the things, it is one of his defining characteristics, and I think it's been a positive one,
right, good.
Rather than a negative one. Yeah.
So some crime writers have a series character, or a set of related characters. I'm thinking of Michael Connelly's got the police character and the lawyer character, but they're all in the same story world. And you have. You've been so prolific. I mean, you've written across genres. You've written poetry and pulp fiction. You've written over 100 books. Could you talk a bit about this balance between the artistic impulse to do something new each time and the sort of the realities of what sells books and there's no doubt series characters do. And you've also been a publisher, so you've seen both sides of it, both the artistic and the sort of the commercial imperatives.
Yeah. I mean, I think the key thing to say is I've always thought of myself as a commercial writer. In other words, it's always been what I've done for a living. I stopped teaching after 12 years because I thought this might be another way of earning a living. I didn't stop teaching because I thought, oh my God, I want to be a writer. It never occurred to me that I wanted to write, actually, before that. Never. I just thought, for various reasons, that it is too long to go, it would be too long to go into, that this would be another way of earning a living. So writing for me has always been, first and foremost, if I write this, is somebody going to buy it? I mean, is a publisher going to buy it? Not is whether the readers buy it is the publisher's problem. But my problem is always the publisher going to buy it? So when I began, I was writing a number of different books in a number of different areas, which were all pulp fiction. So we're talking paperback fiction, 128 pages. That's 50,000 words on the nail. I did one a month for 3 years. Okay, so I wrote westerns, war books, whatever, teenage romance. Last Summer, First Love set in Mablethorpe.
I can see people rushing out already.
So I was basically I was being paid to learn to write.
Have you always sort of known where things end?
No. I mean, I changed the person who's responsible for the death of the woman whose body is found at the beginning of Dark Science, I changed my mind about who was responsible 3 times during the writing of the book. and more usually than not, that's how I would work.
Okay.
Because seems to me that if you're writing those kind of books, which is where there's a police investigation, I quite like as a writer being kind of one step ahead of the detective. I mean, you know, so what happens is you set up, say you set up 3 possible murderers, let's call them murderers for now. You need to give each one motivation, you need to give each one opportunity, and you don't need to decide yet which one it was necessarily. Let the detective or whatever go and talk to these people. They'll have a conversation, they'll form an opinion about who might be guilty and who might not. And then at some point you have to decide, but you don't need to rush. It's nice to let the characters develop and their situations develop, and then you can decide.
It's quite nice to be surprised as a writer.
Well, I think so. I mean, you know, a lot of crime writers don't write that way, and they need to know everything absolutely worked out, and that's fine. That's just the way they work, the way I work. I like to leave it. When I did a radio adaptation of one of the novels, I changed the identity of the murderer because when I rewrote the dialogue scenes for radio, it came out kind of a bit different, and I thought, I can't believe he'd do that. No, really, I thought, I can't believe he'd do that. So I just chose one of the other possible suspects, and this time he did it, and that was fine. Nobody noticed.
And of course, please say a big warm thank you to John Harvey.